Zara pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the cargo bay, her large purple eyes tracking every movement of the massive human who had just boarded their transport ship. The 7-year-old Kytherian girl had heard the stories whispered among her people, tales of the terrifying humans who conquered worlds with their bare hands, who showed no mercy to the weak, who crushed entire civilizations under their boots. The human stood nearly 3 times her height, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the entire doorway. His skin was a dark brown that reminded her of the burnt soil after her homeworld's volcanic eruptions, and strange black fur covered the top of his head in tight curls. Most frightening of all were his eyes, small compared to hers, a startling blue color that seemed to pierce right through her soul. Captain Vex, the Germanian who owned this cargo vessel, was speaking to the human in hushed tones near the entrance. Zara caught fragments of their conversation through her translator implant, something about passage to the outer rim and no questions asked. The human's voice was impossibly deep, like the rumble of distant thunder during the storm season on Kythera. "The cargo hold is your space for the journey," Captain Vex explained, his 4 arms gesturing nervously. "We reach Epsilon Station in 12 standard days." The girl, she was already here when we departed. Her family paid for her passage. The human's gaze swept across the cargo bay and landed directly on Zara's hiding spot behind a stack of supply containers. She held her breath, pressing herself even flatter against the wall. Her heart hammered so loudly in her small chest that she was certain he could hear it from across the room. "I see," the human said simply, his voice carrying an odd gentleness that didn't match the story she'd been told. Captain Vex shuffled uncomfortably on his 6 legs. She's very quiet. Won't cause you any trouble. Her kind are naturally timid." Zara wanted to protest that description, but fear kept her silent. Back home on Kythera, she had been anything but timid. She loved climbing the crystal formations in her family's garden, racing her friends through the bioluminescent forests, and asking endless questions that made her teachers laugh. But that was before the war came to their sector, before her parents put her on this ship with nothing but a small bag and promises that they would find her soon. The human nodded to Captain Vex, who quickly scurried away to other parts of the ship. Alone now with the terrifying creature, Zara watched as he set down a large black bag and began examining the cargo hold. He moved with surprising care for something so massive, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he started pulling items from his bag, Zara's curiosity overcame some of her fear. She had expected weapons, the plasma rifles, and shock batons that the stories described humans carrying. Instead, she saw folded fabric that might be clothing, several small rectangular devices, and what looked like food containers. The human seemed to sense her watching him. He turned slowly in her direction, and Zara's blood turned to ice. This was it. He had spotted her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the terrible roar of anger that the stories promised would come. Instead, she heard something impossible. The human was speaking, but his voice was soft, almost musical. "Hey there, little one. I'm not going to hurt you." Zara kept her eyes shut tight. It had to be a trick. Humans were known for their cunning, weren't they? They would say anything to lower their victim's guard before striking. "My name is Marcus," the human continued. "I can see you're scared. That's okay. I'm pretty big, aren't I? I bet I look pretty scary from where you're sitting." Despite herself, Zara cracked open one purple eye. The human, Marcus, had moved closer, but he wasn't looming over her the way she expected. Instead, he had lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the metal floor, bringing his massive frame down to a less intimidating height. He was still enormous compared to her, but the gesture was unexpected. "I'm going to guess you're Kytherian," Marcus said, tilting his head slightly. "I've met a few of your people before. Beautiful planet, from what I hear. All those crystal caves and singing trees." Zara's other eye opened in surprise. How did this human know about the singing trees? Those were sacred to her people, hidden deep in the forests where outsiders never ventured. Or so she had thought. Marcus seemed to notice her reaction. A smile spread across his face, not the predatory grin she had expected, but something warm and genuine. "I had a friend once, a Kytherian botanist named Lyran. She told me all about the trees that sing different notes depending on the season. She said the music could make even the saddest person smile." The mention of her people's sacred groves stirred something in Zara's chest. Homesickness mixed with confusion. How could this fearsome human speak so gently about something so precious to her culture? She also told me, Marcus continued, that Kytherian children are incredibly brave, even when they're scared. Said they have hearts bigger than suns. Zara found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Lyran, was she really your friend? Marcus nodded solemnly. She was. She saved my life once, during a medical emergency, on a research station. Brilliant scientist, kind soul. She taught me a few words in Kytherian, actually. He paused, then spoke a phrase in her native language, the pronunciation careful but recognizable. Veltar Nesh Corvain, may your light shine bright. Tears sprang to Zara's eyes. It was a traditional blessing that adults gave to children, words she hadn't heard since leaving her homeworld. No human should know those words, yet Marcus had spoken them with something approaching reverence. How? She started, then stopped, still not trusting this strange turn of events. How do I know that? Marcus asked gently. Lyran taught it to me because she said children should always be reminded that they carry light inside them, especially when they're far from home. He gestured to the stark metal walls around them. This doesn't look much like Kythera, does it? Zara shook her head, fresh tears rolling down her lavender cheeks. Nothing about this cold, sterile cargo ship reminded her of the warm crystal caves and singing forests of home. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out one of the rectangular devices she'd seen earlier. When he touched its surface, it lit up with a soft, multicolored glow. He placed it on the floor between them, and suddenly, the harsh metal walls were painted with shifting patterns of blue, green, and purple light. It's not the same as your bioluminescent forests, Marcus said quietly, but I thought it might be a little more comfortable than staring at gray walls for 12 days. Zara stared at the dancing lights, transfixed. They didn't sing like the trees of home, but there was something soothing about their gentle movement. She found herself relaxing slightly, though she still maintained her distance from the human. Are you really not going to hurt me? She asked in a small voice. Marcus met her gaze directly, his blue eyes serious. I promise you, little star, I will never hurt you. In fact, I'd very much like to be your friend during this journey, if you'll let me. The old stories warred with what she was seeing before her. Everything she'd been told about humans suggested they were monsters, but Marcus seemed different. Kind, even. Still, years of frightening tales weren't easily forgotten. I don't understand, Zara admitted. Everyone says humans are dangerous. They say you destroy everything you touch. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing sad. Some humans have done terrible things, he said finally. Just like some members of every species have done terrible things. But that doesn't make all humans monsters, just like it doesn't make all Kytherians timid or all Germanians greedy. He gestured to himself. I'm just Marcus. I fix broken machines and help people when I can. I've never conquered a planet or hurt anyone who didn't try to hurt me first. I drink too much coffee, I read old books, and I collect pictures of different sunsets from around the galaxy. Despite her lingering fear, Zara found herself curious. You collect sunsets? Marcus smiled again, that same warm expression that seemed so at odds with his intimidating size. Would you like to see some? When Zara nodded hesitantly, Marcus touched his device again. The dancing lights shifted, and suddenly, they were surrounded by the image of a brilliant orange and pink sunset over an alien landscape. Purple mountains stretched into the distance, and two suns hung low in a lavender sky. This one's from Thesha 7, Marcus explained. The twin suns create the most incredible light show every evening. With another touch, the scene changed to show a green sun setting over an ocean of liquid crystal. Then, a red dwarf star sinking behind massive mushroom-shaped formations that glowed with internal light. Each world has its own special beauty, Marcus said softly. I like to remember them, especially when I'm traveling through space and everything looks the same. Zara crept a little closer, fascinated despite herself. Do you have one from Kythera? Marcus shook his head regretfully. I've never been to your homeworld. But Lyran showed me pictures once. She said the sunsets there turn the whole sky purple and make the crystal formations look like they're full of stars. They do, Zara exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her fear. And when the light hits the singing trees just right, they chime like bells. It's the most beautiful sound in the universe. I'd love to hear it someday, Marcus said sincerely. Maybe you could tell me more about your home? I promise I'm a good listener. For the first time since boarding the ship, Zara felt something other than fear or homesickness. This human, this Marcus, seemed genuinely interested in her world, her culture. He spoke of her people with respect, not the dismissive contempt she'd been taught to expect. Still, a lifetime of warnings couldn't be erased in a single conversation. She remained where she was, close enough to see his sunset collection, but far enough to run if needed. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked suspiciously. "What do you want?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I suppose I'm being nice because that's who I am. As for what I want," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to feel safe on this journey. I want you to know that not everyone in the galaxy wishes you harm. And maybe, if you're willing, I'd like to be your friend." "Just friends," Zara pressed. "You don't want anything else?" "Just friends," Marcus confirmed. "Though I should warn you, I'm told I make terrible jokes, and I have a tendency to hum while I work. My previous traveling companions have complained about both." Despite everything, Zara felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm an engineer," Marcus explained. "I fix broken ships, repair damaged stations, that sort of thing. It's honest work, and it takes me all over the galaxy." "Is that why you're going to Epsilon Station?" Marcus nodded. "Their main atmospheric processor is acting up. Without it, the station can't support life much longer. They need someone to get it working again." The way he spoke about his work, with quiet pride and genuine concern for the people he helped, didn't match any of the stories Zara had heard about humans. Engineers were helpful, weren't they? They built things instead of destroying them. "The stories about humans," she said slowly. "Maybe they're not all true?" "Maybe not," Marcus agreed gently. "Stories have a way of growing in the telling, especially scary ones. They become bigger and more frightening each time someone repeats them." Zara thought about this. Her grandmother used to tell stories about the old days, when Kytherians first learned to fly between the stars. Each time she told the tale, the first ships grew a little bigger, the journey a little more dangerous, the heroes a little braver. If those stories could change, maybe the ones about humans could be wrong too. "I'm still scared," she admitted quietly. "That's okay," Marcus said. "Being scared doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. You're alone on a strange ship with someone you don't know. It would be silly not to be scared." His understanding, rather than his reassurances, helped ease some of the tension in her shoulders. He wasn't trying to convince her that her fears were foolish, just that she didn't have to let them control her. "What happens if I decide to trust you?" Zara asked. "Then, we'll be friends for the next 12 days, Marcus said simply. "I'll share my sunset collection. You can tell me about the singing trees. And maybe the journey won't feel quite so long for either of us. And if I decide not to trust you?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "Then, I'll respect that choice. I'll stay on my side of the cargo bay, you'll stay on yours, and we'll both mind our own business until we reach Epsilon Station." The fact that he was giving her a choice, really giving her a choice without pressure or manipulation, meant more to Zara than any promise could have. She looked at the dancing lights painting the walls around them, at Marcus sitting patiently on the floor, at the pictures of distant sunsets that spoke of wonder instead of conquest. Maybe, just maybe, she could be brave enough to find out if the stories were wrong. "I think," she said carefully, "I might like to be friends. But I'm keeping my distance for now." Marcus smiled. And this time Zara didn't find it frightening at all. "That sounds perfectly reasonable to me, little star. Friendship is something that grows over time, not something that happens all at once." As if to prove his words, he touched his device again and showed her a new sunset. This one featuring 3 small moons hanging in a star-filled sky above a field of silver grass that seemed to wave in an unfelt breeze. For the first time since leaving Kythera, Zara felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. Maybe the next 12 days wouldn't be so frightening after all. 3 days had passed since Marcus and Zara first spoke, and the cargo bay had transformed from a cold, sterile prison into something approaching comfortable. True to his word, Marcus had kept to his side of the space, but he had also quietly made improvements that benefited them both. The harsh overhead lighting now competed with his collection of soft glow panels, casting the metal walls in gentle blues and greens that reminded Zara of twilight on Kythera. He had arranged his belongings in neat piles that somehow made the vast space feel more intimate, more like a temporary home than a storage compartment. Zara had gradually moved closer to the invisible line that divided their space. She now sat only about 10 feet away from Marcus, close enough to clearly see the images on his device, but still ready to retreat if needed. Her own small bag remained in the far corner, her escape route, just in case. "Tell me about this one," Zara said, pointing to the sunset currently displayed on Marcus's device. It showed a massive red star setting behind what looked like floating islands suspended in midair, each trailing ribbons of luminescent mist. That's from Gravitas Prime," Marcus replied, settling back against a supply crate. "The whole planet has lower gravity than most worlds, so the land masses just float freely in the atmosphere. The mist you see is actually tiny organisms that glow when they're disturbed." "Do people live on the floating islands?" Zara asked, her purple eyes wide with fascination. "They do. The Gravitans have these incredible ships that look more like flowers than spacecraft. They use controlled wind currents to move between islands." Marcus touched the device, zooming in on one of the distant land masses. "See those golden structures? Those are their cities, grown rather than built, shaped from living coral that feeds on sunlight." Zara leaned forward unconsciously, her fear momentarily forgotten in her curiosity. "Grown cities? How do they make them the right shape?" "Very carefully and very patiently," Marcus chuckled. "It takes decades to grow a single building. The Gravitans say that rushing leads to ugly architecture and weak structures. They'd rather wait 50 years for a beautiful, sturdy home than live in something hastily constructed." 50 years, Zara gasped. "But what do they do while they wait?" "They live with family, or in temporary shelters, or sometimes they travel to other islands as guests," Marcus explained. "Their whole culture is built around patience and community. No one expects you to have your own space until you're ready for it, and no one has to wait alone." The idea fascinated and comforted Zara in equal measure. On Kythera, families often lived together for generations, with new crystal chambers slowly grown from the living rock of their ancestral homes. It seemed the universe held more similarities between species than the scary stories suggested. "What's the strangest world you've ever visited?" she asked, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping her thin arms around them. Marcus considered carefully. "That would probably be Melodia. The entire planet is essentially one massive musical instrument." "How can a planet be an instrument?" "The surface is covered in these enormous crystal formations, a bit like your singing trees, actually. But these crystals are hollow and connected by underground tunnels. When wind passes through them, they create harmonics. The whole planet literally sings." Zara's eyes shone with delight. "What does it sound like?" "That depends on the season, the weather, even the time of day," Marcus said. "I was there during storm season, and the music was incredible, like a symphony written by the planet itself. The Melodians, that's what they call themselves. They've learned to predict weather patterns just by listening to the changes in the planetary song." "I would love to hear that," Zara whispered. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more closely. In the soft light of his glow panels, he could see the exhaustion that she tried so hard to hide. Despite their growing friendship, she still slept with one eye open, still startled at every unexpected sound from the ship's systems. "Zara," he said gently, "when did you last get a full night's sleep?" The question caught her off guard. She looked away, suddenly, interested in examining her small hands. "I sleep enough." "That wasn't what I asked." Marcus's voice remained kind, but persistent. "You've been on this ship for over a week now, and I've noticed you never really rest. Even when you close your eyes, you're still listening, still ready to run." Zara's shoulders tensed. "I have to be ready. In case I decide to stop being nice and revert to the monster you expected me to be?" The blunt question made her flinch, but she nodded reluctantly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a deep sadness. "Zara, what happened to your family? What made them put a 7-year-old child on a cargo ship alone?" For a moment, It looked like she might retreat back to her corner. Her eyes darted toward her bag, her muscles tensing for flight. But something in Marcus's expression, not curiosity but genuine concern, made her stay. The war, she said simply. It came to our sector, our planet. It wasn't supposed to be important enough for anyone to fight over. But there were crystals in our deep caves. Crystals that could power faster than light engines. Marcus felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He'd heard rumors of strip mining operations in the outer colonies, whole worlds torn apart for their resources while galactic governments looked the other way. The hegemony came first, Zara continued, her voice growing smaller. They said they just wanted to buy mining rights, that they'd pay fair prices and only take what they needed. But then more ships came, and the prices got lower, and they started taking crystals from the sacred groves without permission. Your parents fought back? Not just my parents. Lots of families. We tried to make them understand that the groves were sacred, that taking too many crystals would kill the singing trees. Tears began rolling down her lavender cheeks. They didn't care. They said trees didn't matter, only the crystals did. Marcus clenched his hands into fists, fighting down a surge of anger that had nothing to do with Zara and everything to do with the story she was telling. So your people organized resistance, he guessed. Yes. My father helped coordinate between the Crystal Singer families. My mother used her knowledge of the cave systems to hide supplies. Zara wiped her nose on her sleeve. But then, the hegemony declared martial law. They said anyone who interfered with mining operations was a terrorist. The word hung in the air between them like a poison. Marcus had seen the aftermath of anti-terrorism operations on dozens of worlds. Entire populations classified as enemy combatants. Children separated from their families for security reasons. They started taking people, Zara whispered. Whole families, sometimes entire communities. Loading them onto ships and sending them to prison colonies on dead worlds where they couldn't cause trouble. But you escaped? My parents saw the ships coming. They had maybe an hour's warning from friends in the orbital traffic control. Zara's voice broke. They put me on the first transport off-world with just my bag and all the credits they had saved. They said they'd find me, that they'd follow on the next ship. But the next ship never came. Zara shook her head, fresh tears falling. Captain Vex says the hegemony blockaded the whole system 3 days after I left. Nothing gets in or out without military authorization. Marcus felt sick. He'd seen this pattern before. Resource extraction followed by population control, always justified as necessary for galactic security. The fact that Zara's people had been defending their sacred sites only made it worse. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry that happened to your family, to your world. The other passengers on my first ship, they told me stories about humans, Zara continued. They said humans were the ones who taught the hegemony how to strip mine worlds efficiently. They said humans invented the prison colonies. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his species' reputation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Some humans did those things, he admitted. Humans were among the founding members of the hegemony. And, yes, we developed many of the technologies they use for resource extraction. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Zara. But humans were also among the first to speak out against the abuses. There are humans fighting right now to change those policies, to find better ways of coexisting with other species. How do I know which kind you are? Zara asked, and the question wasn't accusatory, just tired and scared. You don't, Marcus said honestly. Not for certain. All you can do is watch what I do, listen to what I say, and decide for yourself whether my actions match my words. He stood up slowly, moving to his bag with deliberate, non-threatening movements. When he returned, he carried a small cylindrical device that Zara didn't recognize. This is a quantum communicator, Marcus explained, sitting back down. It can send messages across any distance instantaneously, regardless of blockades or interference. Zara stared at the device. I've never seen anything like that. They're very new and very expensive. I have this one because I do emergency repairs in remote locations where normal communication is impossible. Marcus held the device out to her. I want you to take it. Zara made no move to accept the offered communicator. Why? Because if anything happens to me, if I get sick or injured, or if I do something that makes you think I'm dangerous after all, you can use this to call for help. There's a frequency programmed and that will connect you directly to the Galactic Aid Society. They're a humanitarian organization that helps displaced persons find safe passage to neutral worlds. You're giving me a way to escape you? I'm giving you a way to feel safer, Marcus corrected. Real safety isn't about being protected by someone else. It's about having options, having some control over your own situation. Zara looked at the communicator as if it might bite her. I don't understand. If you wanted to hurt me, wouldn't this make it harder? Yes, it would, Marcus agreed. Which is exactly why I want you to have it. I want you to know that you're not trapped here with me, that you have choices beyond just trusting me or hiding from me. Slowly, carefully, Zara reached out and took the communicator. It was heavier than she expected and warm to the touch. The surface was covered in buttons and small screens that meant nothing to her. How does it work? She asked. Marcus showed her the simple activation sequence and the emergency frequency. If you ever need to use it, just follow those steps and explain your situation. The Aid Society will help you, no questions asked. Zara clutched the device to her chest, feeling something she hadn't experienced since leaving Kythera, a sense of control over her own fate. For the first time in days, she wasn't entirely dependent on the kindness of others. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me for giving you what should have been yours from the beginning, Marcus said. Every sentient being deserves the right to choose their own path. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset images cycle through Marcus's collection. The tension that had filled the cargo bay for days seemed to ease slightly, replaced by something that might eventually become trust. Marcus, Zara said eventually. Yes. The stories about humans, they said you were monsters because you were strong enough to be monsters. They said power always corrupts, that anyone with the ability to hurt others eventually will. That's a common belief, Marcus acknowledged. What do you think about it? Zara considered the question seriously, turning the communicator over in her hands. I think maybe power doesn't corrupt people. Maybe it just shows who they really were all along. Marcus smiled, and this time Zara didn't feel even a flicker of fear. That's very wise, little star. Much wiser than most adults I know. I'm still scared, Zara admitted. But maybe I'm ready to be a little less scared. That's all anyone can ask for, Marcus said gently. Fear keeps us alive, but it shouldn't keep us from living. As the artificial night cycle dimmed the lights in the cargo bay, Zara curled up in her corner with the communicator still clutched in her hands. For the first time since boarding the ship, she allowed her eyes to fully close. And, for the first time in over a week, she dreamed of home without nightmares. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Zara from her sleep and sending her sliding across the metal floor of the cargo bay. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red, and an alarm klaxon wailed through the corridors. Marcus was already on his feet, moving toward the bay's communication panel with swift, purposeful strides. What's happening? Zara called out, her voice barely audible over the alarm. I don't know yet, Marcus replied, pressing buttons on the panel. Captain Vex? Captain, please respond. The comm crackled with static before Captain Vex's panicked voice filled the bay. Engine failure in the primary drive core. The containment field is destabilizing. We have maybe 20 minutes before catastrophic breach. Zara felt her blood turn to ice. She'd heard about engine failures on cargo ships. When the antimatter containment failed, there was rarely anything left but scattered atoms. What about the backup systems? Marcus asked, his voice remaining calm despite the chaos. Backup drive took damage from a power surge. Navigation is offline. Life support is running on emergency power. And we're drifting toward a gravity well. Captain Vex's voice rose higher with each word. I'm sending out a distress signal, but we're 3 days from the nearest traffic lane. No one's going to reach us in time. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the readouts on the wall panel. Captain, what's your cargo manifest? Do you have any industrial fabrication equipment aboard? Some basic tools in cargo bay 7Y. I might be able to jury-rig a solution, but I need to see what we're working with. Marcus was already moving toward his bag, pulling out devices that Zara didn't recognize. Can you give me access to the engineering sections? You're an engineer? Captain Vex sounded surprised. Specializing in emergency repairs, Marcus confirmed. But I need full access to ship systems and whatever tools you have available. There was a pause. Then, the sound of Captain Vex's claws clicking rapidly on his console. Done. All sections are unlocked. All systems are available. But if this doesn't work, then we'll face that when it happens, Marcus said simply. Right now, we focus on the solution. As the comm went silent, Marcus turned to Zara. Her large purple eyes were wide with terror, and she clutched the quantum communicator he'd given her like a lifeline. Are we going to die? She asked in a small voice. Marcus knelt down in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. I don't know, he said honestly. But I'm going to do everything I can to prevent that. The question is, do you want to come with me or stay here? Come with you. I could use an assistant, and sitting here alone while the ship falls apart isn't going to be much fun. Marcus managed a small smile. Besides, you're Kytherian. Your people have excellent spatial reasoning and fine motor control. You might actually be helpful. Despite her fear, Zara felt a flicker of pride. Her teachers back home had always praised her puzzle-solving abilities and her steady hands during delicate crystal-singing lessons. What would I have to do? She asked. Hold tools, relay information between engineering sections, maybe help me fit into some of the smaller maintenance spaces. Marcus stood and offered her his hand. But only if you want to. You can stay here if you prefer. Either way, I won't think less of you. Zara looked at his outstretched hand, then at the flashing red lights that painted the walls like blood. Staying alone in the cargo bay while Marcus worked to save their lives seemed like the worst kind of waiting. At least if she helped, she would know what was happening. She took his hand. Marcus's palm was warm and rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle as he helped her to her feet. Good choice, little star. Let's go save this ship. They made their way through corridors filled with emergency lighting and the groans of overstressed metal. The ship felt different now, less like a vessel carrying them safely through space, and more like a wounded creature struggling to stay alive. Cargo Bay 7 was a maze of industrial equipment and spare parts. Marcus surveyed the available tools with the rapid assessment of an experienced engineer, mentally cataloging what he had to work with. Not ideal, but workable, he muttered, then looked down at Zara. Here's what's happening. The primary drive core is about to explode because the magnetic containment field is failing. The backup drive is damaged, but not destroyed. If I can reroute power from non-essential systems and create a temporary containment matrix, I might be able to stabilize things long enough to get us to the nearest station. How do we do that? Zara asked. Very carefully and very quickly. Marcus was already pulling equipment from the shelves. First, we need to get to the engine room and assess the damage. Then, we'll know what kind of miracle we need to perform. The engine room was a nightmare of sparking conduits and warning lights. The primary drive core, a cylindrical chamber the size of a small building, pulsed with unstable energy behind failing magnetic barriers. Zara could feel the wrongness of it even without understanding the technology, like a song played in the wrong key. Marcus pulled up holographic displays showing the engine's status, his fingers flying over the controls as he analyzed the data. The good news is that the antimatter reservoir is still intact, he said. The bad news is that we have about 15 minutes before the containment field collapses completely. Can you fix it? Zara asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Not fix. That would take days in a proper shipyard. But I might be able to patch it. Marcus pointed to a series of smaller machines surrounding the main drive. These are field generators. If I can bypass the damaged ones and link the working units directly to the backup power core, we might be able to create a stable bubble around the antimatter. He turned to Zara. I need you to crawl into that maintenance shaft and tell me which of the field generators are still showing green lights. Can you do that? Zara looked at the narrow opening Marcus indicated. It was barely wide enough for her small frame, and it led directly toward the unstable drive core. Every instinct screamed at her to run away from the dangerous machinery, not toward it. But Marcus was counting on her. They were all counting on her. She nodded and crawled into the shaft. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and hot, filled with the acrid smell of burning electronics. Zara had to use her translator implant's light function to see the status displays on the field generators. Most showed angry red warnings, but she found 3 that still pulsed with steady green indicators. Units 7, 12, and 18 are still working, she called back to Marcus. Perfect. Now I need you to look for a junction box near Unit 12. It should have a blue access panel. Zara squirmed through the tunnel until she found the box Marcus described. Found it. Good. Inside, you should see 3 sets of cables, red, blue, and yellow. I need you to disconnect the blue cables and reroute them to the yellow terminals. But what if I do it wrong? Zara's voice shook with the weight of responsibility. Then, I'll guide you through fixing it, Marcus said calmly. Zara, I wouldn't ask you to do this if I didn't believe you could handle it. Your hands are steadier than mine, and you're small enough to reach places I can't. Right now, you're the best person for this job. His confidence in her abilities gave Zara the courage she needed. She carefully disconnected the blue cables, her small fingers working with the precision that was her species' birthright. The cables clicked into their new positions with satisfying snaps. Done, she reported. Excellent. Now get out of there. I'm about to bring the backup power online. Zara scrambled back through the maintenance shaft faster than she'd entered it, emerging just as Marcus activated the new power configuration. The unstable pulsing of the drive core began to slow, its chaotic energy gradually settling into a more regular rhythm. But the victory was short-lived. New alarms began blaring, and the holographic displays showed multiple system failures cascading through the ship. What's wrong now? Zara asked. Marcus studied the readouts with growing concern. The power rerouting worked, but it's drawing too much energy from life support. We've got maybe 6 hours of breathable air left, and that's assuming nothing else breaks. So we're still going to die, just more slowly? Not if I can help it. Marcus was already moving toward another set of controls. There's one more option, but it's risky. He brought up a navigation display showing their current position relative to nearby star systems. A red indicated their location, drifting helplessly toward a large planet that glowed ominously on the screen. That's Kepler, 442b, Marcus explained. It's a garden world, breathable atmosphere, comfortable gravity, plenty of water. The problem is that it's also uninhabited and completely cut off from galactic civilization. Cut off how? Electromagnetic storms in the star's corona make long-range communication impossible, and the asteroid belt around the outer system makes navigation extremely hazardous. Ships that go there tend not to come back. Zara felt her heart sink. So even if we land safely, we'd be stranded? Probably, Marcus admitted. But stranded and alive is better than dead in space. And there's always a chance that someone might mount a rescue mission eventually. The ship shuddered again, and more warning lights joined the chaotic symphony of failing systems. Whatever choice they made, they needed to make it soon. I can try to patch the life support, and hope we drift close enough to a shipping lane for rescue, Marcus continued. Or I can use our remaining power to adjust course for Kepler, 442b. If we're lucky, we might be able to land in one piece. What would you do if you were alone? Zara asked. Marcus looked at her in surprise. Why does that matter? Because I trust you to make the right choice, she said simply. You've been honest with me about everything else. What does your experience tell you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing their options. If I were alone, I'd take the gamble on the planet. Ships this damaged rarely hold together long enough for rescue, and the odds of drifting into a shipping lane are astronomical. At least on Kepler, 442b, we'd have air to breathe while we figured out our next move. Then, that's what we should do, Zara said with more confidence than she felt. You're sure? Once I commit our remaining power to course correction, there's no going back. Zara thought about her parents, probably imprisoned on some dead world, wondering if their daughter had survived. She thought about the stories she'd been told about humans, and how wrong those stories had turned out to be. She thought about Marcus giving her the quantum communicator, trusting her with the power to call for help against him if needed. I'm sure, she said. Let's go to the planet. Marcus smiled, the first truly happy expression she'd seen from him since the crisis began. All right then, little star. Let's see if we can land this wreck in one piece. He began working at the navigation controls, his hands moving with the confident precision of someone who had performed similar miracles before. The ship's engines coughed to life, pushing them gradually away from their drift toward the gravity well and on a new heading toward the distant green out of Kepler 442b. How long until we get there? Zara asked. About 36 hours, if everything holds together. Will everything hold together? Marcus glanced at the cascade of warning lights surrounding them. Ask me again in 35 hours and 59 minutes. Despite everything, Zara found herself laughing. Maybe it was hysteria, or maybe it was just relief at having a plan, but something about Marcus's calm acceptance of their impossible situation struck her as genuinely funny. What? Marcus asked, grinning at her unexpected reaction. You're the strangest monster I've ever met, Zara said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Well, Marcus replied, turning back to his controls. We've got a day and a half to figure out just how strange I really am. The crash came 32 hours later, when they were still 4 hours out from Kepler 442b. It started with a sound like thunder rolling through the ship's hull, followed by the sickening sensation of artificial gravity cutting out completely. Zara found herself floating in the engineering section where she and Marcus had been monitoring the increasingly unstable systems, her small hands scrambling for purchase on anything solid. Hold on, Marcus shouted, pushing off from a wall panel to reach her. He wrapped one arm around Zara and used the other to grab onto a support beam just as the ship lurched violently to starboard. Through the engineering section's observation window, Zara could see Kepler 442b growing larger by the minute, a beautiful blue-green marble streaked with white clouds. It would have been breathtaking if they weren't falling toward it in a barely controlled plummet. Is this normal for crash landings? Zara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. There's no such thing as a normal crash landing, Marcus replied, checking his handheld scanner. But we're actually in better shape than I expected. The atmospheric entry angle is good, and I'm reading solid ground about 50 kilometers ahead. Looks like a continent with forests and rivers. What about the ship? Will it survive hitting the ground? Marcus glanced around at the sparking conduits and failing displays surrounding them. The ship is already dead, little star. We're just riding the wreckage down. But I've been working on something that might help us walk away from this. He guided them through the weightless chaos to a section of the engineering bay where he'd been assembling something during their journey to the planet. It looked like a large metal cocoon surrounded by portable force field generators. It's an emergency survival pod, Marcus explained, helping Zara inside the cramped space. I cannibalized it from the ship's escape systems and the backup life support. It should protect us during impact and provide air and warmth for about a week after we land. A week? What happens after that? Then, we start learning how to live on a garden world, Marcus said, sealing them into the pod. Could be worse. I've seen the atmospheric readings, and Kepler 442b has oxygen levels close to Earth normal, gravity about 80% standard, and a day-night cycle that won't drive us crazy. The pod's internal systems hum to life around them, creating a small bubble of safety in the midst of the ship's death throes. Outside, Zara could hear the roar of atmospheric entry, the scream of tortured metal, and the thunderous noise of a dying starship fighting against a planet's gravity well. Marcus, she said quietly, are you scared? Terrified, he admitted without hesitation. Crash landings are always terrifying, even when you're prepared for them. The difference is that terror doesn't have to control you. It just has to remind you to be careful. My father used to say something similar. He said fear was like pain, useful for keeping you alive, but dangerous if you let it make your decisions for you. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was a crystal singer, Zara said proudly. He could make the cave formations ring in harmonies that would bring tears to your eyes. My mother said he sang her into love before she ever saw his face. What about your mother? What was she like? Zara smiled, remembering. She was a cave reader. She could look at crystal formations and tell you about the history of the mountain, predict where new caves would form, find hidden passages that had been lost for centuries. She used to take me exploring in the deep places where the crystals glowed brightest. The pod shuddered as the ship hit the planet's upper atmosphere, but The conversation helped distract Zara from the violence happening outside their small sanctuary. "They sound like remarkable people," Marcus said. "I hope we'll have the chance to find them someday." "Do you really think we might?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "I think your parents are probably tougher than the hegemony gives them credit for. Prison colonies are harsh, but they're not death sentences. People survive them, sometimes for years, and rescue missions do happen." "Have you ever been part of a rescue mission?" "A few," Marcus admitted. "Usually when engineering problems turn into humanitarian crises. I've helped evacuate failing orbital platforms, repaired life support on damaged refugee ships, that sort of thing." "Why? I mean, why risk your life for strangers?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, listening to the increasing noise of their descent. "I suppose because I can," he said finally. "I have skills that are useful in emergencies, and I've been lucky enough to survive long enough to get good at using them. That seems to come with a responsibility." The ship hit something, probably the tops of trees, and the pod was thrown violently against its restraining harnesses. Emergency foam began flooding the small space, surrounding them in protective gel that would cushion the final impact. "Hold your breath," Marcus shouted over the chaos. "This is going to get rough." The last thing Zara remembered before the foam covered her face was the sound of the ship tearing itself apart against the surface of an alien world. She woke up to silence. The emergency foam had dissolved, leaving them in the cramped pod surrounded by the soft glow of backup lighting. Marcus was already awake, checking readings on a small display panel. "How long was I out?" Zara asked, her voice hoarse. "About 4 hours." "How do you feel?" Zara took inventory of her body. She was sore all over, and there was a small cut on her forehead that had been cleaned and bandaged while she slept, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. "I think I'm okay." "What about you?" "Bruised but functional," Marcus replied. He touched a control, and part of the pod's wall became transparent. "Take a look." Zara pressed her face to the clear section and gasped. They were sitting in what remained of the cargo ship, but the vessel was barely recognizable. Metal twisted into impossible shapes surrounded them, and through the gaps, she could see afternoon sunlight streaming through a canopy of alien trees. "We're in a forest," she breathed. "About 2 kilometers from a river, according to my scans," Marcus confirmed. The ship came down in a clearing and slid into the treeline. "We're actually incredibly lucky, a few degrees difference in our approach, and we would have hit solid rock instead of relatively soft ground." "Can we get out?" "The pod is designed to be mobile." Marcus activated another control, and Zara felt their small sanctuary begin to move. "It has enough power to carry us about 50 kilometers, and the fabrication unit can produce basic tools and supplies." They emerged from the wreckage into an alien paradise. Kepler 442b's forest was unlike anything Zara had ever seen. Trees with silver bark and leaves that shimmered like crystal, flowers that seemed to glow with their own internal light, and streams of clear water that sang over polished stones. "It's beautiful," Zara whispered. "And apparently safe," Marcus added, checking his atmospheric readings. "The air is clean, the water appears drinkable, and I'm not detecting any obvious toxins in the local ecosystem." They spent the rest of the day setting up a basic camp near a stream, using the pod's fabrication system to create shelter materials and simple tools. Marcus worked with the efficient competence of someone who had done this before, but he made sure to explain each step to Zara. "The key to survival is systems," he told her as they assembled a water purification unit. "Food, water, shelter, security. Get those 4 things working reliably, and you can survive almost anywhere." "What about rescue?" "The quantum communicator." Marcus tested the device and shook his head. "Just like we expected, the electromagnetic interference in this system blocks long-range communication. We're on our own until someone comes looking for us." "Will anyone come looking?" "Eventually," Marcus said with more confidence than Zara expected. "I was scheduled to repair the atmospheric processor on Epsilon Station. When I don't show up, they'll start asking questions. The problem is that it might take them months or even years to trace our route and figure out what happened." That night, they sat by a small campfire Marcus had built using traditional methods, watching alien constellations wheel overhead. The forest around them was alive with strange sounds, not threatening, just different. Musical chirps from creatures they couldn't see, the whisper of wind through crystal leaves, the distant call of something that might have been a bird or might have been something else entirely. I should be terrified, Zara said quietly. I'm stranded on an alien world billions of kilometers from home with no way to contact anyone. But somehow, I'm not. Why do you think that is? Zara considered the question. Because I'm not alone, she said simply. And because you've shown me that being strong doesn't have to mean being cruel. Marcus poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the alien sky. Your people's stories about humans, they weren't entirely wrong, you know. We can be cruel. We can be monsters. Some of us have done terrible things to other species. But not all of you. No, not all of us. Marcus looked at her across the fire. The thing about humans is that we're capable of both incredible cruelty and incredible kindness. Which one we choose usually depends on the circumstances and the example set by others around us. What circumstances made you choose kindness? Marcus smiled. A 7-year-old Kytherian girl who was brave enough to crawl into a dangerous maintenance shaft to help save a ship full of strangers. Zara felt her cheeks flush with pride. I was just doing what needed to be done. Exactly. That's what kindness usually is, just doing what needs to be done, especially when it's hard or scary. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their new world. Finally, Zara spoke again. Marcus? When rescue comes, if it comes, what happens then? What do you mean? I mean, will you still want to be my friend? When we're not depending on each other for survival. Marcus's expression grew serious. Zara, you saved my life today. You trusted me when everything you'd been taught told you I was dangerous. You've been braver and more resourceful than most adults I know. He paused. I would be honored to be your friend for as long as you'll have me. Even though I'm not human, especially because you're not human, Marcus said firmly. The galaxy is big enough for all of us, and it's the differences between species that make it interesting. As they settled down to sleep in their improvised shelter, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Kythera, a sense of belonging. Not just the belonging of shared danger, but the deeper belonging that came from being valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. Tomorrow they would begin the real work of survival on this alien world. They would need to find more permanent shelter, establish reliable food sources, and figure out how to live in an ecosystem they didn't fully understand. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Zara felt truly safe. Not because she was protected from all danger. The forest around them held countless unknowns. But because she was no longer facing that danger alone. She fell asleep to the sound of Marcus humming softly, the same gentle melody he'd been humming when she first hid from him in the cargo bay. But now the sound brought comfort instead of fear, a reminder that sometimes the most frightening strangers could become the most treasured friends. 3 months had passed since the crash, and Kepler 442b had transformed from an alien wilderness into something approaching home. Zara sat on the porch of the cabin she and Marcus had built together, watching the sunrise paint the crystal trees in shades of gold and rose. In her hands, she held a small carving she'd made from local wood, a figure of a Kytherian child reaching toward the stars. The morning light hits the trees differently today, Marcus observed, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of the bitter tea they'd learned to make from local leaves. I think the season is changing. Zara accepted her cup gratefully, inhaling the steam that carried hints of cinnamon and something that might have been mint. The sound is different too. Listen. Marcus tilted his head, focusing on the forest sounds around their clearing. The musical chirps of the small flying creatures they'd named wind singers had shifted to a lower register, and the crystal leaves chimed more softly in the morning breeze. You're right, he said with admiration. Your ears are getting better at reading this place than my instruments. It was true. Over the past months, Zara had developed an almost supernatural ability to interpret the moods and patterns of their adopted world. She could predict weather changes by the way the flowers turned toward or away from the sky, identify which fruits were ripe by the harmony of their growth songs, and sense the presence of the larger creatures that move through the deep forest by the subtle changes in the windsinger's calls. It's not so different from reading crystal caves back home, Zara explained. Everything has patterns if you know how to listen for them. Their cabin was a testament to both human engineering and Kytherian intuition. Marcus had designed the basic structure for maximum efficiency and durability, but Zara had guided the placement and orientation to work in harmony with the natural flow of the forest. The result was a dwelling that felt both solid and organic, like it had grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. Speaking of patterns, Marcus said, pulling out his scanner, "I'm picking up something unusual this morning. There's a metallic signature about 20 kilometers north of here, and it wasn't there yesterday." Zara felt her heart skip. A ship? Maybe. Or it could be debris from our crash that shifted position, or natural or deposits that my scanner is finally sensitive enough to detect. Marcus tried to keep his voice neutral, but Zara could hear the hope he was trying not to show. Want to investigate. They had developed a routine for exploring their world, always together, always with emergency supplies and communication gear, always with detailed plans and backup contingencies. Marcus had learned to defer to Zara's instinctive understanding of the forest, while Zara had absorbed his methodical approach to safety and preparation. The 20-kilometer journey took them through terrain they'd never explored before, deeper into the forest than they had ever ventured. The trees grew larger here, their crystal leaves forming a canopy so thick that walking beneath them felt like moving through a cathedral of living light. "Marcus," Zara said softly as they crested a small hill, "look." In the valley below them, a sleek ship rested in a clearing that was definitely not natural. The vessel was maybe half the size of the cargo ship that had brought them here, with clean lines and the kind of advanced hull plating that spoke of military or high-end civilian construction. But more important than the ship itself were the figures moving around it, bipedal shapes in what looked like environmental suits, clearly engaged in some kind of survey or repair work. "That's not a rescue ship," Marcus said grimly, studying the vessel through his scanner's magnification function. "The hull configuration is wrong, and those people are armed." "Armed how?" "Pulse rifles, scanner scramblers, and what looks like capture equipment." Marcus lowered his scanner and looked at Zara seriously. "This isn't a search and rescue operation. This is something else entirely." As if summoned by his words, one of the figures below suddenly stopped and pointed directly at their hiding spot. Even at this distance, Zara could see the unmistakable shape of military-grade sensors sweeping in their direction. "Run," Marcus said quietly. "Now." They moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, using every trick Marcus had taught Zara about moving quietly and every instinct she developed about reading the terrain. But their pursuers had technology on their side, and it soon became clear that they were being herded rather than simply chased. "They're trying to drive us toward the river," Zara panted as they paused behind a cluster of silver-barked trees. "There's a narrow canyon about a kilometer ahead where we'd be trapped." "Then, we don't go to the river," Marcus replied. He pulled out his quantum communicator and began working with its internal circuits. "I've been thinking about this device you gave me back to you weeks ago. The electromagnetic interference here blocks long-range transmission, but maybe I can modify it for short-range, high-intensity broadcast. What good would that do? If I can get a signal out past the immediate interference field, it might reach the automated beacon network that runs along the major shipping lanes. It would take time for anyone to respond, but at least the galaxy would know we're here." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Through the crystal foliage, they could see 3 figures in environmental suits moving through the forest with military precision. One of them was clearly tracking them with some kind of sensor device. "There's nowhere to run," Zara whispered. "They're too close." Marcus looked at the modified communicator in his hands, then at Zara. "I need about 2 minutes to finish the modifications and send the signal. Can you buy me that time?" "How?" "By doing something they won't expect." Marcus pressed the device into her hands along with his scanner. "Take these and circle around to their ship. If you can get close enough to their communications array, you might be able to boost the signal and punch through the interference. What about you?" "I'm going to give them something more interesting to chase than one small Kytherian girl." Before Zara could protest, Marcus stood up from their hiding place and began walking directly toward their pursuers, his hands raised in apparent surrender. "I'm human," he called out loudly. "My name is Marcus Chun, Emergency Engineer Registry Number 7441 Alpha. I'm the one you're looking for. The effect was immediate. All three pursuers converged on Marcus, their attention completely focused on the valuable human they'd apparently been sent to find. In the confusion, Zara was able to slip away through the forest toward their ship. As she moved through the trees, fragments of conversation drifted back to her through her translator implant. The pursuers were speaking Galactic Standard, but with accents she didn't recognize. Confirm identity, value intact, secondary targets irrelevant. Extraction in 30 minutes, orbital pickup, no witnesses. The words sent ice through Zara's veins. These weren't rescuers, they were kidnappers. And they specifically wanted Marcus. She reached the ship's clearing and crept to the edge of the tree line. The vessel was larger up close than it had appeared from the hill, and definitely military in design. Two more figures stood guard near the boarding ramp, but they were facing outward, watching for threats from the forest rather than from within their own perimeter. Zara studied the ship's external communications array, comparing it to the technical drawings Marcus had shown her on his scanner. If she could reach the primary transmission node and connect the modified quantum communicator, she took a deep breath and began moving. The approach required every skill she'd learned during 3 months of forest survival. She moved like wind through grass, like water around stones, using techniques that were part Kytherian natural ability and part hard-learned human methodology. The guards never saw her coming. The communications array was mounted on the ship's hull about 3 meters off the ground, easily reachable for someone with Kytherian climbing abilities. Zara scaled the smooth metal surface in seconds, her small hands finding purchase where larger beings would have needed equipment. The connection process was more complex than she'd expected, requiring her to match frequencies and override security protocols that Marcus had taught her to recognize. But her steady hands and spatial reasoning abilities served her well, and within minutes the modified communicator was interfaced with the ship's transmission system. The signal boost was dramatic. Instead of the weak, localized broadcast Marcus had originally planned, the quantum communicator was now punching through the electromagnetic interference with the power of a military-grade communications array. The distress signal would reach the beacon network, automated relay stations would amplify and forward it, and within hours every major shipping line and planetary government in the sector would know about 2 stranded civilians on Kepler 442b. But, more immediately, the modified signal had triggered every proximity alarm on the kidnapper's ship. "Intruder in the communications bay," one of the guards shouted. "Someone's hacked our transmission array." Zara dropped from the ship's hull and ran for the forest as pulse rifle fire erupted behind her. But she had accomplished her mission. The signal was away, help was coming, and the kidnapper's operation had just become significantly more complicated. She made it back to Marcus's position just as the pursuers were loading him into portable restraints. He was conscious, but clearly drugged, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. "The little alien got to our ship," one of the kidnappers was saying into a communication device. "She sent some kind of signal before we could stop her." "How long until extraction?" another voice asked. 20 minutes. "But if she got a distress call out?" "Then we take what we have and leave. The human is the priority. The hegemony will pay premium rates for an experienced engineer, especially one with emergency repair skills." Zara felt rage building in her chest. The hegemony, the same organization that had destroyed her world and imprisoned her family, was now trying to kidnap Marcus. They wanted to use his skills to maintain the ships and stations that kept their empire running, probably as forced labor in some remote facility. She looked at the modified scanner Marcus had given her, noting the readings it was showing from the kidnapper's ship. The vessel was powerful, but it had one critical vulnerability. Its shields were designed to repel energy weapons and deflect asteroids, not to handle the precise harmonic frequencies that could shatter crystal. And Zara was a crystal singer's daughter. She crept closer to the ship, positioning herself near the hull where the structural supports would be most vulnerable. Then, she began to sing, not with her voice, but with the subsonic harmonics her people used to shape living crystal. The ship's hull began to resonate. At first, it was just a slight vibration that the kidnappers dismissed as engine noise. But, as Zara continued her song, the vibration grew stronger. Metal began to sing in harmonies it was never designed to produce. Stress fractures appeared in critical structural joints. "What's wrong with the ship?" someone shouted. "Hull breach in the aft section. We're losing atmosphere. Emergency launch. Get us out of here before the whole thing comes apart." The kidnapper's ship lifted off in a shower of sparks and emergency foam, its hull singing a discordant song of structural failure. They had managed to escape, but they'd been forced to leave Marcus behind in their haste. Zara ran to where he lay in the clearing, still groggy from whatever they'd drugged him with. She knelt beside him and began checking for injuries, her small hands gentle but thorough. "Did they hurt you?" she asked anxiously. Marcus blinked slowly, his vision gradually clearing. "Just sedatives. Nothing permanent." He tried to sit up, then thought better of it. "Did you get the signal out?" "Better than that," Zara said with fierce pride. "I sent it with their ship's transmitter array. Half the galaxy probably heard it by now. And the ship? Structural failure due to harmonic resonance. They won't be kidnapping anyone else for a while." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "You brought down a military-grade vessel by singing at it." "Crystal singing is more versatile than most people realize," Zara said modestly. "My grandmother always said that anything made from shaped matter could be reshaped if you knew the right frequency." A new sound echoed across the forest, the distinctive roar of atmospheric engines running at full power. But, this time, the ship that appeared over their clearing bore the distinctive markings of the Galactic Aid Society. "This is Gas Rescue 7. A voice called through external speakers. We received your distress signal. Are you Marcus Chun and Zara of Kithira?" Zara helped Marcus to his feet, and together they walked into the clearing where the rescue ship was settling to the ground. The boarding ramp lowered to reveal a mixed crew of humans, Germanians, and several species Zara didn't recognize. "We're here," Marcus called out, his voice still slightly slurred but growing stronger. "And we're ready to go home." But as they walked toward the rescue ship, Zara realized something important. Over the past 3 months, home had stopped being a place and had become something else entirely. The feeling of being valued for who you were, the security of knowing someone would risk everything to keep you safe, the simple joy of sharing discoveries and facing challenges together. She looked up at Marcus, this human who had proven that the scariest stories weren't always true, who had shown her that strength could be gentle and that different didn't have to mean dangerous. "Marcus," she said as they reached the boarding ramp. "Yes, little star? When we get off this planet, when we're back in civilization, will you help me find my family?" Marcus smiled, the expression warm with the kind of promise that had nothing to do with words. "Zara, we're going to turn the galaxy upside down if we have to. Your parents are out there somewhere, and we're going to bring them home." As the rescue ship lifted them away from Kepler 442b, Zara pressed her face to the observation window and watched their forest sanctuary shrink into the distance. She would always remember this world as the place where she learned that the universe was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than any story could capture. But more than that, she would remember it as the place where a frightened little girl and a gentle giant had become family, proving that sometimes the most unlikely friendships were also the strongest. The ship turned toward the stars, carrying them back to a galaxy that suddenly seemed full of infinite possibilities.